I have a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like this.
Live from the G. Burbick Farm Studios, it's the Baseball Coaches Podcast with Britt Taylor.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Baseball Coaches Podcast number 2. This is Britt Taylor, and
this is DJ Yoakley.
And so welcome to Baseball Podcast number 2. We're titling this one, Extreme Ownership in Baseball. So after our last podcast, we've got lots of great input from folks about other things that we want to talk about, especially college recruiting and so forth. And there's so many things, so many topics, and I want to thank everybody for giving me that input. But I felt it was really important that we talk about this next topic because you could teach anything that you would like to, but when it comes down to it, I really think that leadership is the most important thing that you can teach the kids, not only for the baseball team themselves, but also for life. And in all that we do, preparing these kids, because baseball is a great teacher of life because it's a game of failure. But in all that we do, I think if we're teaching these kids how to lead, that is probably one of the most important things that we can do. So that is why we're going to talk about that today. So that being said, I've been in leadership positions probably for the last 20 years through my work and through coaching. And I like to explain to folks that if you're married, you're also in a leadership position, in a sense, if you have a family. And so I spent a lot of that time. I've read many different books. I've been into John Maxwell, and I've read his books. And actually one of my favorites was by Coach Holtz from down in the East Liverpool. But about 4 years ago, I found something, and it has changed my life in a lot of positive ways. And I have actually used it in coaching baseball, and it has had a huge effect in the young men that I work with. And the book is called Extreme Ownership, and is written by a guy named Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. And they are two former Navy SEALs who were involved in Iraq back in the 2000s. And one of the most notable things that they did where they were in charge of Task Unit Bruiser, which was actually Chris Kyle's task unit, the American sniper over in Ramadi. But the book is fantastic. And what I liked about it was it simplified things, and it made it so easy to understand, and so, even more importantly, it made it so easy to execute. Because I read all the other books, and nothing, but nobody laid it out in simple terms so that it made it so easy for me to just pick up and do it. And that's why I think the book has become, it was a hit, it was a bestseller, and Jocko has actually, he's got his own podcast, and he's becoming a sensation. Him and Leif actually started a business called Echelon Front, which is a consulting business where they go to businesses around the country and they change the structure of the business through leadership and turn things around, and it's very, very, very powerful. So before I go into the principles, there's one story that I wanted to talk about that kind of lays the foundation. And I call it the boat crew story. And I always start with this when I work with the kids. I always work with this so they understand how important leadership is and how effective it is. And the boat crew story, if you've seen a movie about the Navy SEALs or something like that, when they go through BUD/S, they have these boat crew races, and they get in groups of 7, and they'll have like 12, 15 teams. So each boat is numbered like 1 through 15. And the instructor will say, bust them. And that means they run out, they grab the boat and they run as fast as they can on the sand, across the berm and into the ocean, and then they paddle out through the waves to a marker, and then they paddle back. It's a race. And what happens every single time is they'll have one boat crew, and for the purpose of the story, we'll say it's boat crew 6. They'll have one boat crew that wins every single time. And their old saying, they're saying there in the Navy, we use it too, is second place is first loser.
Yep. Always.
Always. But so the first team, the team that wins, boat crew 6, they get to rest. And then they'll have, we'll say it's boat crew 2, they'll have a boat crew out of the 15 that's finishing last every single time. And so what the instructors do is they'll take the winning boat crew leader from boat crew 2, or 6, excuse me. I don't want to confuse anybody. They'll take the winning boat crew leader and put him with boat crew 2. And then they'll take the leader from boat crew 2 and put him with boat crew 6. And now they have the race again. They go out, they race back, and guess who wins, DJ?
Boat crew 2.
Exactly. Boat crew 2 wins the race now. Boat crew 6 they're coming close, but boat crew 2 is now winning. And the moral of the story is that leadership is everything.
So let's put this aside, because this is a myth that I've heard for years, is that baseball is less about leadership in managerial positions and more about the talent that you put out on the field. Agree or disagree?
Disagree. Because, and this is a perfect segue, because I have seen in my experience, and I've seen it this year, I've seen it in past years, I have seen excellent teams who had the best talent on the field who did not win because there was a leadership problem.
Yeah.
Whether it was at the top or there was something else going on within, which something that I saw, sometimes you'll get a parent or a coach or a player who starts causing problems or issues within, and that causes the whole thing to fall apart. And if you don't have unity, or if you don't have someone else who steps up, who corrects the problem, and then redirects the ship, you will have issues. Now, there's stories of like the old 70s Oakland A's where, nobody liked each other. But I can guarantee you that somebody was directing that ship. And at some point, there was some sort of leadership that was taking place there. So that's a really good point, and that was a perfect segue because, and then that being said, I've seen average teams who weren't, you could say maybe that team shouldn't have been where they were, and everything comes down to leadership, and they excelled because of that. So, I really think that this is important stuff. Now, the tough thing is when you teach this, you can't force feed it down teenagers' throats.
Or even lower than that, down to the little league level or
Right.
the T-ball level or anywhere you
Right.
start. You can't. I'm in agreement with that. There has to be buy-in. You cannot force feed it.
Exactly. And in order for there to be buy-in, and this is where it becomes so powerful, in order for it to be in buy-in, you have to lead by example.
Mm-hmm.
And until that happens, you have to take these principles and live them and be the example. Now, you can talk about them, and I'll give some examples later of how I've used that, and the kids have then, the eyes have come open because we've talked about it, and then I've given them examples later in the season as things have gone on. So you can talk about it, but you can't force feed it down them. The most important thing that you can do as a coach or a manager is you can lead by example. And when you do that, and when you live by these principles, then things will start to change for you. And then you'll start to create leaders as well. And that's really the whole purpose. And when you when you're a coach and you're a team, and I can guarantee you Bill Belichick is, we talked about him last week, he's the perfect example of this. When you were living by this example, you will create leaders on your team. And then there's less that you have to, when you create leaders, then you no longer have to micromanage.
The Patriot way, if you will, is so simple. And if you really break down it, and I'm a real big fan, not so much of the Patriots as a football team, but the Patriots as an organization, because they do it well at a high level, and they are able to take away and plug in anybody besides the guy under center. But the guy under center is your true leader. He's your execution specialist. You have, obviously Bill Belichick, who is your overall leader, your CEO, so to speak. And I've heard it both ways. Tom Brady's the CEO, Bill Belichick's the CEO. Reality is your general manager is Tom Brady. Your CEO is Bill Belichick, because Brady's not doing anything without Belichick's permission. But I digress. The biggest thing for me is they have one saying. They've been saying it for years, and it's as easy as this. Do your job. 3 words, 1 meaning.
Yes.
And the beautiful thing about this, and I try to, even at YSN, I try to incorporate this. If you are doing your job at the highest level that you can, and you have 10, 11, however many people it is, on a baseball field, in an organization, if everybody does their job, it'll be miraculous. You'll see miraculous things happen, everybody going the same way. The problem we have, not only in society, on the baseball field, on the football field, whatever field you're on, in your professional life, in your personal life, it's when you start getting 8 different jobs, or you're trying to do other people's jobs, or fill in here and there, that things get mushed and chaos ensues. I mean, you look at the Steelers, you look at the Pirates. The Pirates make a career out of bringing in guys that do more than one job.
Mm-hmm.
It makes no sense to me, except for when it comes down to dollars and cents.
Dollars and cents.
So when you look at, if the Pirates were able to say, okay, we need a third baseman, and we need him because we need a good glove.
Mm-hmm.
We need a third baseman because he can play left field, right field. He can, catch. He can, throw in relief. That's the Pirate way, making the most of your money. Great organizations say, we're going to buy in to a good quarterback, a great pitching staff, a strong third baseman, a big hitting first baseman, a defensive catcher, because they're good at their craft at that one position, not because they can play multiple positions on the field. Those days are numbered. The society that we live in started trying that. How many hats can you wear at your job? And then the overall, everything suffered. Because people were tired. They were overworked and all this thing. Do your job. The Patriots bought in. They don't necessarily have, to me, the best people, but they have people that do their job really well, and they're really happy to do one job.
Now, I think with New England, you have a couple things. I agree 100%. And that comes, they have, one of the factors that I'm going to talk about is belief or buy-in.
Sure.
Okay? And you have to believe. You have to have a set goal, a direction that you're headed, and everybody must know what that direction is. And so if you don't have that, you're going to get mass confusion, or people aren't going to buy in, or people are going to go different directions, and you're not going to get people working together. But I think when people, at this point, they've created a situation in New England where you know what you're headed for before you even get there. And when I'm going to New England, I already know, do your job, and I know there's discipline, and I know that there's a level of expectation, and when I get there, I'm going to live up to it. And so they've created that atmosphere, and now, they can, like you said, they can plug anybody into the system. And you can almost plug anybody else besides Tom Brady. And I can guarantee you that if Tom retired tomorrow, Bill Belichick would find someone good enough to fill that position, and they would do well.
Agreed, but it takes a special. I mean, Tom Brady isn't replaceable. I'm sorry.
No, he's
I
not.
heard
He's not.
that earlier. In the debate goes on online everywhere. You see that he is the greatest of all time versus he's not. He's a system quarterback. Listen, just because he's a system quarterback does not mean he's the greatest to ever do it.
Right.
And listen, Joe Montana, fantastic. 4 Super Bowls, made all 4 Super Bowls, won all 4 Super Bowls. Awesome.
Right.
This guy Tom Brady has been to more Super Bowls, and I don't want to make this about football because it's a baseball coaches podcast, but if you have somebody who has, in their career, been to more championship games than they haven't, there's something special there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's, whether you give it to, Mr. Kraft, the owner, whether you give it to Bill Belichick, the coach, or you give it to the ace, Tom Brady, there is something special there in that set of circumstances that allows them to continue. Now, replicating it is much more difficult because you don't have this structure, you don't have the leadership, as we're talking about right now, to replicate that because there's not buy-in. I mean, all you have to do is look down the road to the Steelers, and it's chaos. It's absolute chaos.
And that goes back to what I talked to you about, and I know people get mad at me. I've got friends that I played college football with who are from Pittsburgh, and some of them are on the fence as far as they can't stand Tomlin, and some of them are on the other side of the fence where they love Tomlin.
Mm-hmm.
And the lovers have gotten upset with me because I said, look, the problem in Pittsburgh is there's no discipline. And there's one man in charge of that. There's one man that's supposed to make sure that there is discipline. Pittsburgh, for all intents and purposes, has 10 times the talent that New England has. But New England has discipline.
Yep.
And discipline, as I'm going to talk about later, discipline equals freedom.
Yep.
And if you have discipline, you can do exactly what New England does. And it's one of the most important things that there is. Jocko talks about how important discipline is, and related to the military, they'll look into situations. One of the best scenarios over in oh my gosh, they've looked into situations where units have fallen apart, and it would start with something as simple as not shaving, and it started with, oh, okay, well, we're not going to shave. And then it would go to something else. And then the discipline would drop in that, okay, well, we're not going to wear our helmets. And then we're not going to do this. And before you know it, as the discipline starts to break down, everything else starts to break down. And as petty as it may seem sometimes, as such as shaving or maybe making sure that your uniform is on correctly. And I will do that. I will not let a kid walk out onto the baseball field with his shirt not tucked in.
Right.
And because that is showing that I'm disrespecting the game and that we are not disciplined, and I won't do that. So those little things, as petty as they might seem, are huge. And Pittsburgh is a perfect example of what I just talked about as far as great teams that should perform and aren't. And the major reason is discipline.
And I think one of the things that you hit the nail on the head here is the fact that not letting your kids go out of the dugout without their shirts tucked in, their hats on straight, not backwards. Listen, there's 24 hours in the day. And if they want to do hat backwards, myself included, hat backwards, and they're not catching. I mean, catchers are one of the few that can wear their hat backwards because you can wear it under your skull cap or underneath your helmet because you literally physically cannot put your hat frontwards. But the biggest thing is you're representing not only yourself, you're representing your team, you're representing your family, you're representing an organization, whatever you're representing. Coaches have to take it upon themselves to hand down discipline.
Yeah.
And it's not always going to come from the home. Mm-hmm. You to look at, some of the school systems you take, everyone's different. Mm-hmm. But being able to take it by the bull by the horns and say, listen, when you're on this team, you play for the name on the front of the jersey, not the one on the back.
Right.
They're all going to be happy for you. Your fans, your family, they're all going to be out there cheering for you. But you take a military approach and you say, listen, this is a unit. Mm-hmm. We have to play as a unit to win. If it's a bunch of individuals, it will never work.
Right.
And I've never seen, and The folks out there in baseball coaches podcast land may disagree. I've never seen a team of individuals win a championship.
No.
Ever.
Nope.
Not you pick a sport, it's never happened. And, well, I guess unless if it's an individual sport. But the closest thing I've seen is in basketball. And we're seeing now in the NBA that a couple bad apples spoil the bunch.
Ugh.
And you look at it, that's a game of 5 guys on the court at one time.
It's huge. And DJ, and I think I might have talked about this in the last podcast. I think it was more in reference to players or parents. I have had players who've tried out. I had one this year. Kid looked good, looked really good, but he acted like he was a superstar. And there's just no room for that. I will not allow that into my dugout because the atmosphere that I want in there is I want cohesion. I want everybody to work together. I want everybody to communicate. And if there's somebody that thinks they're too good to do something, as simple as when we're at practice and I say, and coach is throwing batting practice, and I say, and we're out of balls, and I say, okay, guys, let's pick up the balls.
Yep.
If I got someone who's superstarring it, I will let them know.
Yeah.
And I will make sure that they understand how important superstarring it, how important that is not, and how we won't allow it. I will not embarrass them, but I will point it out, and I will make it known that everybody on this team works together, and if there's a job that's got to be done, nobody's too good to do it. And I will not allow that to happen. The second you allow that, even just a little bit, then they'll start to take advantage of it. And it's tough because you want to be the nice guy. You want to be the nice coach, but you can't let it happen because the second you do, then you open the floodgates.
And there's a difference between being that coach and being Coach Blood. And
Yeah.
what I say about Coach Blood is the coach that won't let anything go. He just yells to yell. I was at a game last night, YSU versus Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And the Milwaukee coach seemingly nothing, and I full respect because his players reacted to it, but he yelled at his players at every turn.
Yeah.
And to the point where you got to the third, fourth quarter, and his players just completely drowned him out. It didn't matter anymore that he was yelling because the kids didn't care.
There's two things there. One, you have to know your kids. Certain kids react differently to certain types of, and if you're just yelling to yell at everybody, then you're going to take a few players, especially if it's in the middle of the game, you're going to turn them off. You just turn the off button off, and you might as well put somebody else in the game. And you might get a couple of kids who get fired up because of it. That was me. I was the kid that got fired up. But if you want to yell at somebody, you got to do it individually, and because you got to understand your player. And the other thing is, the old saying, you never let them see you sweat. And the second you lose control of your emotions, it's done. And I've done it before. I have made that mistake. And as you hear me talk, folks, on this podcast, I am not Mr. Perfect. I have made these mistakes. But that's why it's cool to talk about it, because if you don't learn from them, then you're doomed. But never let them see you sweat. Never let them, and especially your players, your parents, the people around you. And if I'm another coach and I see another coach, I shouldn't divulge this information, but if I see another coach losing it, I'm adding gasoline onto that fire, brother. if it's with the umpires, or I'm finding out how I can create more of a fire, because when I do that, you've just lost it. You've lost your players, and you've lost the umpires. And I'll have a kid who'll be at the plate and he gets a bad pitch, and I'm coaching third, and he'll look down at me, raise his hands up, shake his head, and I'll pull him aside, and I'm like, look, dude, do you think he's going to give you the next call after you just did that in front of him? You just one-upped him. You think he's going to give you another call? And he's like, no. And this is the tough thing, too, as a coach, because you don't want your kids to not think that you're standing up for them. If you've got an umpire that's making bad calls, and you want your coach, your kids, to know that you've got their backs. And so if I'm getting into a situation where an umpire is trying to show everybody how much he knows, I'll pull him aside and I'll act like I'm getting mad, and I'll look at him straight in the face and say, hey, look, bud, I'm out here talking to you and I'm acting mad, but I just want you to know I know your job is really hard. These kids kind of think that you're just calling this game one-sided, so I got to act like I'm standing up for them, but I just want you to know that keep doing what you're doing. I respect you, and this job is really hard.
Can we verify this story with
an
umpire?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's the trick of the trade.
Yeah.
Because and if you've ever tried to umpire, God knows it's not easy.
No.
And they're human beings too. And they've got emotions just like you and I do. And so if you're smart, you'll know how to play them.
Being an umpire is the exact same as being a politician. You're only going to be right 50% of the time.
Right.
Unless you're giving something away. And even then, you're going to be wrong because you're giving it away.
Right.
So, listen, we will never, say it's to me, it's never the umpires. And again, an official at any level, at any sport, is tough because it's judgment call 99% of the time.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be somebody barking up your tree saying, you're not doing your job correctly, or you're cheating us. Umpires are not there to cheat you. Listen, imagine on a Saturday night at 6 o'clock that they have nothing better to do than to cheat some 12-year-old or some 10-year-old out of an at-bat.
Right.
These people are just trying to make an extra couple bucks.
Exactly.
By doing something that they love, whether it's being umpiring or whether it's they love the game of baseball.
Right.
Leave the umpires alone, please.
Yes.
If there's anything that you take from this podcast, please leave the umpires alone, for criminy sake.
That's beautiful.
They're just trying. And let's take it a step further. Parents listening to this podcast, leave the coaches alone. They're not getting paid.
And that being said, umpires have emotions, and when they hear, let's say, we'll just say prospect's parent, and they know because they're sitting on that side and they see that guy yelling. And
are you helping?
Are you helping our cause or not? Or are you hurting it?
Do you feel like you can have the same conversation with that batter you just talked about that you could have with the parents?
No.
Are you helping that situation? Do you think you're going to help your case by barking at the umpire and saying that was a foot outside?
No, because I take care of it before the season starts.
Well, you do. But
Yeah.
let's talk about the average coach that says he doesn't. Maybe it's a first-time coach that is at the coach pitch level or something.
Yeah.
Can you, if it's a bang play at first base, do you think it helps you? Like, do you think the umpire is scared because a parent yells and says he was safe by a mile and he called him out?
No.
Listen, they're 8.
Yes.
They're 10.
Yes.
They're 12. I have never seen a scout sitting in the stands at coach pitch. I've never seen a scout and maybe I'm wrong in Little League. Maybe in Williamsport they're there, but they're not here right now.
If you've ever heard, have you heard of Domingo Ayala?
Oh yeah.
Domingo has a travel ball thing, and the parents like, hey, the kid's 10, and he's like, hey, the scouts are here.
and that's I mean, it's crazy to think about, and it goes back to podcast number 1. Or listen, you're not going to win any state championships in an 8U pitch.
No.
Okay? Take a break. Let the kid, and I'm huge into this,
Yeah.
and my friend probably wants to kill me 99% of the time because I say to my godson, let him learn how to lose.
Yes.
You're not, it's about learning how to lose and get better.
Right.
You know, in life, you're going to lose. In life, you're going to strike out. In life, you're going to pop out. You're never gonna hit it on the screws every single time.
I always say that it's easy. Winning is easy, but losing is difficult, and losing shows your true character.
Absolutely, always.
Losing shows who you really are, and how you handle it is the definition of who you are as a person. And if you can take losing and grow from it, now. As a kid, I had my own little saying somebody that said winning isn't everything. Show me somebody who says winning isn't everything, and I'll show you somebody who just lost.
Yep.
but at the same time, as an adult, as a person, learning to lose and learning how to handle failure is exactly what we're talking about, is everything.
But it also comes, again, full circle to leadership.
Right.
And your leaders have to show you how to lose.
Yes.
Somebody, and learning how to lose has to come from a parent, a coach,
Right.
An uncle. It doesn't matter.
Correct.
The kids have, because they see what you reflect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from these young kids all the way up to
Right.
the big leagues.
Right.
They're a reflection of you.
Totally.
So if you are pouting and yelling at the umpire and yelling at your kids when you're losing, what are they going to do?
Totally.
They're
going to do the same
yell.
thing.
They're going to yell at each other. They're going to yell at their parents.
Yes.
It's never their fault.
Right.
But if you accept responsibility, take the errors
Right.
that you had in that game and reverse them,
Right.
and you get better and better and better, then you're winning some of the 50-50 games
Right.
that maybe you would have lost if you weren't pouting,
Right. Right.
Because we know, I mean, especially in baseball, this was the perfect example of why baseball is like life. One error will lead to another if you continue to think about it.
Yes.
And if you continue to just hound yourself on it or hound somebody else on it,
Right.
they'll either do what? They'll either quit,
Mm-hmm.
they'll completely go in the tank, and you won't be able to count on them. But a good leader picks that person up and says, listen, how can we make it better? How can I lift you up? How can
Yep.
I help you?
Yep.
Because you talked about John Maxwell
Mm-hmm.
and the 21 laws of irrefutable
Yeah.
leadership. Law number 1 is the law of the lid.
Yeah.
And that's my favorite law.
Yeah.
And you're familiar with the
Oh,
law
yeah.
of the lid? Okay,
Yeah.
so the law of the lid is if you're a 6
Mm-hmm.
in hitting,
Yeah.
and you know a lot about defense or pitching,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to sit there and tell your assistant coaches or your players that you know everything about it,
Right.
what's the highest your kid could ever be in hitting? It's a 6.
Right.
Okay? But if you've got a hitting coach that maybe was in the majors or a dad that was really good at hitting and really
Right.
goes on YouTube and he turns out to be an 8, are you going to big league him because he's your assistant coach?
Right.
You let him do the leading in
And
that.
and that comes down to ego.
Yep.
And I'm going to talk about that a little bit too. And being able to put your ego aside. Now, if you're married, you probably know how to do that already, at least a
Quickly.
little bit.
Quickly.
So we're going to go into this a little bit. The biggest principle, and it's so perfect for baseball, and it's the title of the book, is extreme ownership. Now, ownership simply means taking responsibility for the things that you do, which, okay, well, I struck out. And as simple as that seems, it sounds difficult. It's not always easy for people to do. If a kid strikes out at the plate, it's my fault. Well, that first pitch came over and it was a strike. The second one I fouled off, and the third pitch he called me out. It was on the outside corner. It wasn't a strike, coach. So I'll say, okay, it wasn't a strike. But what about the other pitch? Well, that was I got underneath of it a little bit and I fouled it off. What about the first pitch that was a strike? Well, it was right over the plate. Well, why didn't you swing at it? Well, I wasn't ready for it. Okay. Well, did you know that if you hit a first pitch strike, your batting average, at least last year in the Major League, 2018, the batting average was like 360 versus with 2 strikes, the batting average was 188. So I know I spend time teaching the kids how to hit with 2 strikes, but first pitch strike, what's the most important pitch that we teach the pitchers? And that's strike 1. Hey, if it's there and you didn't take it, don't blame the umpire that you struck out. It's your fault. And so one of the biggest things, the first thing that I do with the entire team is I teach them about ownership. And relating to kids, we'll sit down and say, okay, well, let's maybe talk about some things that went wrong and you didn't think it was your fault. So I'll get some hands raised. And I had a kid just recently say, well, I didn't do really well in my math class. I got a bad grade on my test. I got a D. I'm like, okay, why'd you get a D? Well, the teacher, he's not a good teacher, and he didn't do a good job of teaching it to me. Okay, did you possibly maybe try to go talk to him after class? No. Did you maybe look it up on Google and see if there was an answer on the internet? No. Did you possibly maybe talk to your parents about maybe I can get a tutor for this? No. Did you maybe even after the test and you got the grade, go up to the teacher and say, hey, look, Mr. Jones, I'm really sorry about this bad grade. Is there a possibility that maybe we could get together one-on-one and you could show me how to do this? No.
So the effort's not there.
The effort's not there, but you could say effort, but if you learn that something that you did, if you take extreme ownership,
Accountability.
if you take extreme accountability for everything in your world, then you truly, in the end, you truly empower yourself. Because if you made the mistake, and then if you look back and you give the possible reasons why you made the mistake, like what I just covered, okay, well, I didn't talk to the teacher. I didn't look it up. I didn't talk to my parents about, all those different things. If I don't look at all the different things that are possible, as a coach, I've got a group of kids who are on base, and it's the beginning of the season, but we just made a bunch of base running mistakes because for some reason they're not picking up my signs. So I could be a bad coach and I could say, you know what, doggone it, kids. You guys aren't picking up these signs, and I showed you what they are, and I don't know what your issue is, but you better get this straight, or else we're going to do this. Maybe as a good coach, in an extreme ownership situation, I say, well, maybe I didn't spend enough time showing these kids how important these signs are. Maybe these signs are too complicated. I don't think they are, but maybe they think they are. Or maybe they're having trouble seeing them from their point of view. Or maybe, and so now I'm looking at the different possible causes.
So you're looking internally instead of externally.
Internally, yep. Perfect, DJ. I'm looking internally for all the possible reasons why I made the mistake. And that's the only way I'm ever going to fix it. And so when you start to teach this to the kids, they start to realize that a lot of the things that they do, they have total control over. And then that's when they start to learn from their mistakes. And that's will in turn, not only as baseball players, but as young men, as they go out into the world, that's going to make them stronger individuals. And that is the most important thing that we can do, is teach them ownership. And that's what baseball is all about. It's about taking ownership. So those were some great examples. And there are so many other ones. And in the last podcast, I had told the story where I had made the mistake. And I've done that in a job. I've made a mistake, and the first thing that I do, instead of going to my boss and saying, hey, look so-and-so, look, Jill, I did this, and you know what, this CEO that I'm working with at this hospital, they're doing this and they're doing this, and rather than saying, you know what, maybe I should have communicated, Jill, I probably should have done a better job of communicating with that CEO, and if I would have done that, we probably would have had a handle on this. So this is what I'm going to do next time to fix it. And now my boss, instead of saying, this guy's just blaming her, maybe we should think about firing him because he obviously doesn't have a handle in the communication. Versus now I've said to Jill, look, this is what the problem was. I took a look at it from an ownership standpoint, and this is probably what I should do to fix it. And now she's like, wow, this guy, he's great. He's on top of it. He knows what he's going to do. And now I've opened up my line of communication with my boss and with the person that I'm working with, and I've made my life a lot easier, and I've improved my business. So taking ownership, and it's amazing to me because they make it in the book, they make it their number one thing, and in the books, that's what the title is, but so many of us have a challenge with it.
Because it's easier to pass the blame. It's easier to knock somebody else down than to take ownership and say, I need to work harder.
Yeah.
And that's what it boils down to. You look at, leadership by example. It's a great title of a great book, of a great article, of a great everything. Everybody needs to take leadership by example. Yeah. When people look at leadership, they look at, to me at least, when I think leadership, I think positive. I think the toughest thing for me to ever wrap my head around is there is negative leadership.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at history.
Yeah.
There is negative leadership,
Yes.
and we're going to lead these people to do bad things, do terrible things to society.
Yeah.
It can be bad leadership by example.
Yeah.
And I think that's what coaches have to internally
Yes.
look at and say, how am I leading? What is my style of leadership? And am I leading these people to greatness, or am I leading them to be future terrors?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or future people that don't hold themselves accountable.
Yeah.
And I think that as coaches, as leaders, you need to, again, take a little bit of accountability and take a little bit of an audit
Right.
of your circle, of your
Right.
coaches.
Right.
Because, I mean, every coach wants somebody who, like, they talk about basketball programs, right? So the assistant basketball coach is always the guy that talks to the basketball team and gets what the real scoop is.
Mm-hmm.
They never talk to the head coach, ever.
Right.
Same deal with baseball.
Yeah.
Clint Hurdle doesn't get the real scoop. The real
Right.
scoop goes to Jeff Bannister and,
Right.
and guys like that, or your assistant coaches, because they understand. Listen, in the major leagues, it's, my kid's sick. I didn't have a whole lot to sleep last night. I went 0 for 3 today. That's the real story. The story that he gives Hurdle is, or the manager is, I just didn't, it was a bad curveball. It was bad call, stuff like that.
Right.
Where accountability, sometimes there's a disconnect between a player and a manager, or a
Right.
player and a coach. Now listen, as younger ages, I mean, you talk about, the 8 to 10 range or the 8 to 12 range. Kids get sick all the time.
Yeah.
So a kid might be sick, or he might be going through a divorce of his parents.
Right.
Or he might have got picked on at school that day. That affects his psyche, which takes in and out of each at bat, in and out of the field.
Mm-hmm.
As coaches, we have to recognize what the issue is and take our coach's hat off.
Yes.
And put our leadership hat on and
Yeah.
say, okay, how can we get him or her better and make them feel better? And listen, it sounds weird. Make their day better.
Right.
Help them get over this.
And part of that, DJ, comes down, and a big part of leadership is relationships.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to know your people. In baseball example, you have to know your kids. Take the time to talk to each of the boys. Don't look at them as pawns. Now, there's always a dichotomy to that. Sometimes you can't get too close, but you need to take time to know your people, and you need to keep that line of communication between you and them bad. You need to find out, okay, you're not doing hey, what's going on today? Is everything all right? Or rather than, hey, jerk.
You
what
suck.
The heck? Yeah, what the heck? You sure you're not left-handed? But you have to have that relationship with everyone,
And it's
coaches,
not-
players.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily even. We always talk about going the extra mile because there's nobody on it, on that extra mile.
Right.
But reality is, you can't just go and be like, well, he sucks today.
Right.
And just let it be. There's a reason.
Right.
Now, some days they just might stink. You know
Right,
what I mean?
right, right.
There's no explanation for it. But
That's baseball, too.
That's baseball. But there's a lot of reality and across the board, whether you're a baseball coach, basketball, football, that people take their day-to-day
Yeah.
into their jobs and vice versa. And it's tough because you've got to ask some questions, and sometimes those questions might not be easy answers on the other side, but it shows you care.
Yeah.
It shows that you're leading,
Yeah.
and it shows that this person actually cares about my well-being.
And if people think you care,
They go the extra mile.
they will follow.
Yep.
People won't, if they don't think you care, they won't follow. And that was a big Lou Holtz principle. And I love Lou. But people have to know you care. And quickly to get off of the ownership part, although I mean it is probably the most important thing there is when it comes to these kids, but one of the best pieces of marital advice I ever got was the old man told me. He said, "Son, the first thing I do every morning when I get out of bed, I go over and I look at my wife laying in bed, and I look at her and say, 'Honey, I'm sorry, but I'm going to screw something up today. I just want you to know ahead of time.'" That's a great example of extreme ownership.
That's extreme ownership.
So yeah, relationships, establishing that, now, the tough thing, in business, and then sometimes in coaching too, because sometimes you've got to let go of players.
Mm-hmm.
It's happened. I've had to do that. I've had kids in travel who've been with me for a long time who, sometimes, you don't always invite back the next year because, if we talk about Scene Park, sometimes that is, it is what it is
It's
down
the nature
there.
of the beast.
It's very competitive. And, sometimes, and especially in business, I've had people I've had great relationships with that I've had to let go because we had to do it financially or what have you, various other reasons. And that's difficult sometimes, but you have to do it in order to keep the business going or to keep the team going, what have you. So there's, some of the stuff that I'm talking about, there's always a dichotomy to it. So, you want to have extreme ownership, and what we'll talk about real briefly soon is, but you can't have too much, because if you have too much, then you end up micromanaging.
Yep.
And you can't do that either. So leadership is hard. Leadership's not easy, but
here's a branch off that tree.
Yeah.
Do you feel that loyalty in this day and age is disintegrating at a rapid pace?
It is, and we talked about this a little bit last week. Loyalty is disintegrating huge, and there's something to say for loyalty. We talk about these kids moving from one team to another. We see it in leagues, baseball leagues, schools,
businesses,
and colleges and businesses. Loyalty, there is something to be said for it. Now, there's obviously extremes where, and Bo Pelini talked about it in his last press conference. It was on Twitter in regards to these kids in the portal. And Coach Pelini was talking about the fact that they were actually not recruiting for every single need. They were keeping a couple spots open because they knew they were going to have some kids transferring. And in the same breath, Coach said, though, there's something to be said for loyalty, and I'm not the biggest fan of this whole thing. And, what happened to just going to a team and staying loyal, because there is something important in life to learn from that as well. What are you saying when you're just going to cut and run every single time when things don't go your way? That's an example of not taking ownership. And I think that goes hand in hand. So great question.
So let's talk about belief a little bit here. I mean, when you look at belief, you got a couple notes here. So, they got to believe in the mission.
And that's number 2. They have to believe. You have to. I spend time, and it starts at the beginning of the season. With baseball, we have some principles. For example, we don't look at strike 3. We'll just take that for example. I put them into the situation now where they have 2 strikes. Or, hey, pitchers, what's the most important pitch? Or, certain things, whether it's base running, we talk about these principles now, and we get the belief train going now. And the most important thing, because if you don't have belief, if you don't have buy-in, you're in trouble. And so, but the most important thing is that you explain why. Because why is the most important thing that you can do when you're telling somebody to do something. Because, and we make that mistakes as parents too, because if I just say, take that garbage out, and because I said so.
Because
I said so. But if you're not explaining why, that's how everything else comes off, is because I said so. And that's where your leadership value starts to go up, when you explain why. Because once you explain why, then you give them a reason as to, okay, well, for example, bunting. I'll explain to the kids why it is important for every single player on this team to be able to bunt. Even Joe Crusher, who bats fourth all the time. Why is it important, Joe Crusher, for you to be able to bunt? Why is it important for me, Coach? Well, this is the reason, Joe. Because there's going to be circumstances where you're up to bat, and we really need to get that bunt down. okay? But you know what, Joe? You're so important to us. You're so important to this team that I want to keep you in the game. But if we're in a situation where we need to get the bunt down, because percentages are telling me that it's going to be easier for me to get that bunt down than it is for you to hit the ball over the left fielder's head. So I want to be in a situation where I can keep you in the game. Because if I know that you're not a good bunter and you can't get that bunt down, then I've got to put the other guy in. And I don't want to put him in. I want to keep you in the game. Oh, yeah, Coach, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, yeah.
Instead of,
because I told you so.
Or the kid saying, no.
No.
I'm hitting 400, and
Right.
I've got 7 dingers.
And now, after I've explained to Joe Crusher why, I can, and his dad's name's Biff. Now Joe Crusher can go talk to Dad and say, hey, Coach really has me working on bunting because of this situation. And now Joe Crusher's told his dad, Biff, that this was the reason. And now guess who else has buy-in?
Dad?
Exact the Mundo.
You hope.
You hope.
That's the hope. Now, we know it can go the other way.
It can.
My son's not going to bunt. He's a big hitter. He's Joe Crusher. And you see it in movies all the time. And that's one of the biggest things is, again, though, it's leadership. Parents,
Right.
you have to co-lead with the coaches. Coaches, you have to
Right.
co-lead with the parents and let the youngers know it's okay. It's part of baseball. It's
Right.
part of life that you're
Right.
going to have to sacrifice.
Right. And when people at least understand, if I know the parents at least understand my reasoning behind what I'm doing, then I at least have comfort in knowing that they know why I think I'm doing this. And maybe they don't agree with that, but guess what? I know that you're not going to agree. And I say this up front. I used to do it when I coached travel. I'll say this up front, and I say it to the boys. I says, look, guys, you're not going to agree with everything I do. And I will be the first one to tell you that I'm going to make some mistakes out here. But there's a reason behind what we're doing. And so you have to do that. You have to communicate that to them.
And a lot of that goes with the next topic, that 3-letter word where you just throw it right out the window.
And to start in talking, you segue this perfectly, because one of my favorite stories, I read two of Tony La Russa's books. One is absolutely phenomenal. I recommend it to everybody who loves baseball. It's called 3 Nights in August. It was written by Buzz Bissinger. Buzz, he's written a few other really good sports books, but it delves into the everyday life of not just the coach in a series, and this one was the Cards versus the Cubs, but also into the players. And La Russa tells a story of when he first became a manager. Now he was a young manager, and he went straight from the minors to coaching a team in the minors to coaching the Chicago White Sox. And so he got half the season in as a White Sox manager. At the end of the season, the Pirates were playing the Orioles in the World Series. And so Jerry Reinsdorf took La Russa to the World Series, and he took him to a game, and they got into this coach's box with Sparky Anderson and Whitey Herzog and Dick Williams and all these great managers were all together, and they're all sitting together watching the game. And La Russa said they would not stop tearing apart everything Tanner and Earl Weaver did. And he said, oh my God, if they're doing this to these two, for all intents and purposes, legends, if they're doing this to these, what are they doing to me? And so he said the most important lesson I got from that is to not worry about what they're thinking about me, and to just go out and do the best job that I can do, because I know they're not going to agree with a lot of the stuff that I do. And what Tony talks about is that he did have a lot of different theories, and that gave him the freedom to go out and do some different things. Like Tony changed the game as far as the whole relief game. The Major League approaches that totally different today, and that's because of Tony La Russa. He was the one that started that, and his lineup approach was a lot different. And a lot of the things that he did was different, but that gave him the freedom to do that. But that being said, as a coach and as a leader, being able to put your ego aside is absolutely vital. Now, as a coach, and I'm going to talk about, I have Chuck Tanner, Chuck Cato, and Brad Leslie. I'm going to talk about them individually because they're with me now. I like to consider myself a pitching expert because I love to analyze it. I love being a physical therapist. I love to analyze that. But there'll be times, because I'm looking at everything. There'll be times Chuck will say to me, "You know what, Britt? The pitcher's doing this and this and this." And I'll look and I'm like, now, if I was a jerk, I would say, no, he's not. Because I let my ego get in the way and say, no, I got this. But I'll listen to what Chuck, as a good leader, I'll be able to put my ego aside and listen to the input from Chuck and say, you know what? I think you're right, Chuck. Now, if I get into a situation where I know that I totally disagree with him or with Brad, I'll say, well, I think you made a good point, but this is why I think it is this. And so I'll explain to them why. Because my relationship with those two guys is just as important because they're working with the kids too, and the kids look up to them as well. And without them, coaching is hard. And I wish I actually would like to take on two more coaches if I could find the volunteers. Because if you try to do everything yourself, you're in trouble. Yep. There's too much. There's just way too much to do. And other people, when you can learn to put your ego aside because other people have the answer, and in the same time, players. And this will go into what we call decentralized command, being able to put my ego aside to allow the catcher to call the pitches. Putting my ego aside to allow the kids to come up with different ideas. Because it's not just about me. It's a team approach. And if you can put your ego aside, it's a huge factor. Now, ego is important, and that's the dichotomy. I mean, you have to have a certain level of confidence. But you can't be total.
No, I agree with you. We're going to take a real quick break. We'll be back with more right here on the Baseball Coaches Podcast right after this. And welcome back, everybody. Baseball Coaches Podcast, episode number 2 with Britt Taylor and me, DJ Yoakley. Britt, we talked about the ego. We talked about, the good leadership, bad leadership. You have it here in the notes, cover and move.
No.
What are you talking about?
Well, cover and move, and that comes from a military standpoint that Jocko uses to talk about cover and move, which is a strategy you use when you're attacking or you're retreating from a certain position. Cover and move is just basically, I'm covering for you while you're moving, and it's a protection type thing. But what it comes down to, and he uses the military slang, it comes down to communication and working together. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to communicate, and that, again, that goes with relationships, communicating with each other. I work for a company, I currently work for a company as a therapist. We contract services out to different CEOs or different hospitals. And I'm in charge of the therapy departments at these hospitals. And, so our customer is the patients and the families, but also obviously the business that we're providing the service to. So, we have a standard, the company that I work for, you need to talk to the CEOs once a month. I talk to these guys as much as I possibly can. I'll get in there and talk to them and say, hey, what's going on? What's doing this? Everybody that I have a relationship with, I make sure that I am covering and moving, that I'm communicating, and that I'm talking with them as much as humanly possible and not letting a second rest that sometimes you run into, in any type of relationship, I call it the perception monster. And you can't let the perception monster fester. And so communication is the best way, is the best antibiotic to kill the perception monster. So I am constantly communicating and figuring out how we can work together on a consistent basis. And that is a huge part of leadership. And if you forget to do that, you're going to be in trouble. Because when people don't know you're there, when people think that you're absent, then they can start creating images, stories, ideas, and thoughts in their mind that aren't necessarily reality. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So doing that is key. And then that comes in line with the next principle, and that's keeping everything simple. We talked about briefly, with signs. I have used, and I'm going to do it differently this year, unfortunately, but I have used the same exact signs for the last 10 years for stealing a base, and unfortunately now at the B League, I have players that played travel ball for me that play for other teams. And then being in the NABF, I've had like 6 or 7 kids that filled on my team from other teams. My signs are so stinking simple that this season I have to change them. I have to make some other simple signs. I might go to using numbers.
Oh boy.
But at the same time, you have to keep things simple in order for everything to work smoothly.
Well, I think in one of the simplest things is we always want, as just nature. It's human nature to want. There's a philosophy. I don't know if you are familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk. It's called jab, jab, hook.
Yeah.
Or jab, jab, right hook. It's give, take. Give, take. And what we as leaders have, evolved to, the majority of us, is it's take, give.
Right.
Take,
right.
give. And we have to realize that we've got to be able to give to these kids or these parents in order to get buy-in.
Right.
And some people, and I have conversations all the time from leadership standpoints of, listen, you have these relationships, but it's one-sided. You're asking these kids to show up here, do this, and you're not giving them anything.
Right.
And especially as you go higher up the rank, you have, how many assistant coaches do you have? 2?
Just 2 right now. Yeah.
So those 2 are going to be closest to the program because you are the CEO and you're making sure that everybody's getting paid.
Right.
You guys are in the right places. You're a hard person to get a hold of.
Right.
But you've got to, more than anything, wake up every day and figure out what you're giving to your coaches, and then level down to your parents, and then level down even further to your players.
Right.
We as coaches, we as leaders, need to focus more on giving than receiving.
Right.
They are an exact replica of what we are.
Yeah.
And we talked about that earlier. So if you're not giving, how far down the ladder does that fall?
Exactly.
Exactly. And if you're taking all the time, how far down the ladder does that fall? And then what does that look like when everybody's taking and nobody's giving?
And I've always, especially with travel ball, and even now, and I'll tell you a recent story, I've always felt extreme amounts of guilt because of the expense of travel ball. And even Scene, we're charging some parents some big money to play at Scene.
There's cost.
And I always have a certain level of guilt. So we just recently took an additional player, and we had to charge the parents the full price. And I kind of thought maybe we could have prorated it, but I understood the reason why we were charging them the full price. And so I met with them, and they weren't real happy about it, I could tell. But they showed up at practice, and I was showing these kids some specialized things, some more advanced things, and this young man actually hasn't played travel up until this point. And the dad was watching everything I do, and he came up to me and he says, I was kind of unhappy about the whole financial aspect of this, but I just sat and watched what you teach these kids, and I don't care. I'm amazed. And so you have to give. You have to give, no matter it real leadership. And I don't know. I'm sure there'll be some people who are listening to this who aren't religious per se, but true leadership is being a servant leader, like Jesus. And if you can learn to do that, and that is even just more important, give without the expectation of receiving back.
Absolutely. And I think it all goes back to leaders eat last. I'm
Yeah.
sure you've heard that term. And there's a lot of people that leaders, because, a lot of the stuff we've gone over, because their egos think they're leaders, but they're not really. They're just in a position of leadership.
Yeah.
And my take has always been the younger, the guys on the front lines, the guys that are doing the work are going to be the guys eating first. They're going to be the guys that get the most up first, and the leaders get what's left over.
Exactly.
In corporate society, it's flipped upside down, unfortunately.
Yeah. So let's go to our next topic, and that's keep it simple. And we talked about that a little bit already. And we won't spend a whole lot of time because it's really self-explanatory. Keep it simple. The more you're complicating things, the more challenging you're going to make it for the team. So keep it as simple as possible. Now, you don't want to make it too simple, but if you make things too complicated, you're going to create problems. So next, and this is another one that gets a little bit confusing, that looks like it has a military connotation, and it does. It's called decentralized command. Now, decentralized command is one of my favorite parts, because when you can learn to master this, you hit the leadership. You hit the top of the leadership rung. What decentralized command is, once your team has belief, and once your team knows the direction that they're supposed to be going, now you no longer have to micromanage every single thing that they do. Now they can start to do things and take leadership on their own as players, and even while they're playing. And when you do that, you have hit the pinnacle of leadership. Once they are able to create and lead and start to do things without you micromanaging them, you have hit the pinnacle. I got a couple of really great stories that I love to share that are perfect with this. One of my favorite, I love this kid. He plays with Randy Dominguez for years. And his name's Mitchell Seymour. He's a Springfield kid. Mitchell filled in for us a couple times when they weren't traveling, when he wasn't with the FMV fireworks team or Baird Brothers or what have you. And we had a game we were playing, and it was a good game. And Mitchell was at the plate, and he looked at me and he called a timeout, and he walked to me over in the third base coach's box, and he looked at me and says, "Coach, can I bunt?" And I said, we had a runner on second base. I said, "Well, why?" "Because that third baseman is really playing back, and I think if I can lay a bunt down, I can easily get to first." I'm like, "Okay, well, Mitchell's a pretty fast kid. Okay, go for it, Mitchell." So, first pitch, pitcher comes to the belt, he delivers. Mitchell takes a full swing, crushes it between the left fielder and the right fielder, hits a double, run scores. Mitchell gets to second base. Next batter, I forget what happened. There was a wild throw or something, and Mitchell gets to third. I looked at him. I said, "Mitch, what? What was that? You told me you were going to bunt, and you just hit a double into left center." He said, "Well, Coach, I saw he moved up." I'm like, beautiful, beautiful. That is the perfect example of decentralized command. Now, if I let my ego get in the way, and I said to Mitchell, now this is an easy case because he obviously hit a double and it was a good result. But if it wasn't a good result and I let my ego get in the way, I just killed that. I just killed the leadership that would help me. Another kid I'm going to talk about, Cameron Durig. Boys were 13 years old. We're playing a team called Ohio Elite, who is a very good team. They had beaten a team called the Cleveland Spiders, who was actually coached by Mark Shapiro.
That Mark Shapiro?
That Mark Shapiro. That team was ridiculous. If we were playing the Spiders, I could pretty much count on that game being over by the third inning. That's how good they are. But the Ohio Elite had previously beat the Spiders, and now we're playing them in the semifinal game. And it's a great game. It's 8-8. We're going into like the 6th or 7th inning. I got a runner on third base with 2 outs. It's Cameron Durick. Cam is on third base. And I'm not going to say it, but the pitcher is in the windup. And he throws a couple pitches. Cam's watching him. Next thing you know, Cam's getting a bigger lead off of third. He's getting a bigger lead off of third. He sees that kid start to go in the windup. He takes off. And he runs. And he steals home. He slides in head first. Now, we're at Akron, and it's super dry. It's the middle of July, and the dirt is like soft silt, and it's everywhere. And he slides in. He beat the throw. The umpire called him out. And it was close. It was fairly close play, but the umpire called him out. Now, I didn't tell Cameron to steal. And for all intents and purposes, he should have been safe. And the umpire looked at me and said, "Coach, why did you do that?" I said, and now travel ball, you start to know all these umpires. I said, "I didn't do it. He ran on his own." And if it wasn't for the dirt, and if it wasn't for the fact that the umpire couldn't see below his waist that quickly, which was part of the issue, he would have called him safe. But then the umpire also turned around to me and said, "You know what? I think he might have been safe, but I almost felt guilty calling him safe in the situation." And then, of course, I'm walking back. I'm walking back to the dugout, and the coaches are asking me, "Did you?" I'm like, no. But I tell you what, guys, I'll take 100 of that. I'll take 100 kids with that effort, with that intuition, because you know what? If we would have had a better situation, he would have been safe. We just won the game because Cameron took it upon himself. He was a leader, and that is the type of thing that I want to see from the kids. And I've got to be able, in order for them to become leaders, I've also got to put my ego aside, whether it's letting them call balls and strikes or and along that line, we had talked about that last week. I used to, and we'd talk about where I could see things from the dugout. I would have my father-in-law, when my stepson used to play, I would have my father-in-law sit or park his car in center field. And he would have a better view of where the kids were sitting in the box and where the pitches were actually being placed. Because when I can see it from my angle, it's totally different than if you're actually behind the plate or looking from center field. So allowing the kids to do that. We had a thing in practice today we were talking about last week. I'm talking to the kids about, and I had a conversation with the kids about leadership and about decentralized command. And so then we're talking about bunting and getting a runner over to second or third, and doing like a bunt and run, that type of thing. And one of the new player raised his hands and he looked at me and says, "Coach, well, what if, because I do really good with outside pitches, and what if the pitcher's throwing an outside pitch and we've got the steal on? Can I go ahead and swing?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Go ahead." He said, "You're not going to be mad at me?" I said, "I'm going to ask you why you did that, and if you can give me a good reason," I'm like, "Great job." You're not always, we can talk about hit and run and stuff like that, but you're not always going to get the result you want. And, there's, whether you're doing a bunt, whether you're executing a hit and run, whether you're executing just a simple steal, or whatever play that you have on, baseball is a game of percentages. And you're not always going to get the outcome that you want. But I think if you're putting your kids into situations where they're becoming empowered, you are going to go a long way with that. And that is decentralized command. So, the plan. Plan. And now this is the plan, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this because this is a podcast. Plan is a podcast. Being the voracious reader that I am, I'm a big fan of Sun Tzu, The Art of War, or as well as The Prince. But Sun Tzu says that if you know yourself, and we can look at this on a baseball level, if you know yourself, that means you got to know your players. You got to understand what they do in certain situations. If you know the enemy, that is, if you know the team that you're playing, if you understand what their players are doing and what they're capable of doing in certain situations, and you know the terrain, you will always be the winner. And, in a baseball level, let's look at field conditions. Are we dry? Are we wet? Are we slow? Are we fast? Are we windy? Is the wind blowing to the left? Is the wind blowing to the right? Is the wind blowing in? Is the wind blowing out? Is the grass short? Is the grass long? Is the outfield very hard as a rock? Is the infield hard as a rock? Is the grass in the infield high? That type of thing. So, but prior planning for contingencies, because your plan is never going to go exactly the way you want it. Bill Belichick will tell you that firsthand. You can put a program together and you're going to change it right away. But planning for contingencies, understanding what you're going to do in certain situations so you're not sitting there twiddling your thumbs or doing this with your lip, is going to help you so much as a baseball coach. So then, lastly, and we talked about this a little bit, and I think it is absolutely huge, and I will talk about it until the cows come home. And for you Mike Tomlin lovers, you can call me, find my Facebook page. We now have an email. It's baseballcoachespodcast@yahoo.com. You can send me hate mail through the email, or we do have a Facebook page now. I think that Mike Tomlin is a fantastic coach. He understands defense, and he's a great players coach. But you can't coach an army of 10-year-olds if you don't have discipline. I don't care if they're 10. I don't care if they're 30. You have to have discipline, and without it, you do not have anything.
I agree and I disagree at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Because here's my thing. Tomlin, and many coaches out there that are in the same seat Mike Tomlin's in, we are in the same seat Mike Tomlin's in. We are coaches.
Yeah.
We are not babysitters.
No.
And there's a difference.
There is a difference.
What is happening on the field under your watch is way different than what happens outside, in the locker room, things of that nature. Listen, I understand the coach should be able to control the locker room as well. However, you have 80 other things to do, and it's all about what we talked about at the top of the broadcast, doing your job.
Right.
The locker room should be your assistant coaches. My personal opinion should be your pitching coach or your whatever. They should be able to control the locker room. The problem that the Steelers have, the problem that a lot of coaches have, is they get into letting superstars, to what your point was earlier, do what they want because it's easier to not have to deal with the consequences. Mm-hmm. If a superstar or a above average player is reprimanded or is, you shouldn't do this, there's a chance that with loyalty, as we also talked about, the loyalty fades and they go to greener pastures where they can do what they want. I feel Mike Tomlin's doing a great job on the field with what he has, but when you have a diva or if you have an above average player that acts out, he's not, in his words, it's easier to just let him do what he does. And until he loses a step or two or costs them a game or two, he's just going to let a player or multiple players do what they want to do. Mm-hmm. Right or wrong, he was able. Now, they didn't make the playoffs this year, but there was a lot of things that went into that as well.
Now,
player doesn't show up, he's gone.
I'm going to tell you that this was one of the biggest lessons that I had to learn as a boss, as a leader, and as a coach. Because I always want to be the nice guy.
Sure.
I want
Everybody
people
does.
to like me.
Well, maybe some people get kicked out of being the bad guy.
Yeah, sometimes you got to be the bad guy. But guess what? You're only as good as what you tolerate.
Mm-hmm.
And, you get into situations where, well, I like this guy a lot, and I want him to, keep liking me, and I want to continue to be his friend, and I've got this relationship with him, but he is not showing up to meetings on time, and he's disrespecting me when he's out in the town, and he's talking about me to the press, and he's big timing me with one of my former players.
Not looking at signals.
Not looking at signals. He's doing all this other stuff. I've got to address it, because if I don't address it, what's going to happen is it's going to carry on not just to him,
to everybody,
but it's going to carry on to everybody. And so I have to address it and not let it happen once. Bill Belichick, and I'm going to go back to him. One of his former coaches that he worked with the Giants, Tom Coughlin. Tom Coughlin was a big. Now you can, just like I said, there's always a dichotomy, because you've got to find that balance. There will be certain things that happen, as a leader, where you've got to look at and say, am I going to harp on this continually, because now I'm going to seem like I'm micromanaging? Or if I let them get away with this, are we going to be okay, and they're going to respect me more for it? See, there's a fine balance. But you have to establish the discipline hardcore, because if you don't, they're going to get away with murder. And, in baseball, it can be tough. And the funny thing is, you're not just talking about players, but you're also talking about parents. And so you've got to, one of the toughest things when you're coaching a baseball team and you're having practices and kids are showing up 5-10 minutes late, it's not the kid's fault. And now you've got to adjust your whole practice. You've got things lined up. You've got things set out the way you want to, and you're organized, and all of a sudden somebody comes 15 minutes late, and now you got to scrap the whole thing because somebody couldn't get. Now, I understand that maybe they couldn't get off of work. But what I tell my parents is, if you know you're going to be late, please let me know ahead of time. If you know that you can't make it to practice, please let me know ahead of time. Not because I want to be a jerk, but because I like to be prepared. I like to plan. And not for the purposes of my own comfort, but so I know that these kids are getting the best learning they can out of the 2 hours that I've got to set aside for them, because they're what's important. I'm trying to teach these kids, and if somebody shows up late, if somebody shows disrespect, now we've interrupted the whole thing, and now I'm not hurting. It's not hurting Johnny, who showed up 15 minutes late. It's hurting the other 12 kids who are on the team. And that's what a team is all about. And a team needs discipline. And when I say that, if you look at baseball, if we talk about baseball, because that's what this is about, this is a coach's podcast. If I'm talking about these kids show up being fed, that's number one. The worst thing you can have, and Domingo does the perfect thing of the travel mom who brings the grocery bag full of food to the dugout. Now, instead of 15 kids watching what's going on in the dugout, we've got 15 kids fighting over a Snickers bar in Mama Jones's bag. Show up having fed. Or little Johnny is hungry, and so that's affecting his performance because he forgot to eat breakfast. Is that 10-year-old Johnny's fault? Now, if they're 16 years old, yeah, that's your fault. I'm talking to you. You're a 15-year-old. You make sure you get your food before you get to the game. Did you bring your water bottle? Okay. I don't want you running to the concession stand to get something to drink while the game's going on. Did you bring your uniform? Did you listen to the text and see that we were wearing red jerseys and not white ones? Did you forget your belt? Did you These are all things that I hit on right off the bat. Are you watching what's going on in the game? Are you doing this? Are you showing up on time so you can get your warm-up in so that you don't get injured? Because if you get injured, now you're affecting the whole team. So these are things that they might seem like they're little, they're hardcore, they're disciplined, but the little things can mount up and cause huge, giant problems for the entire team.
What are some of the things that coaches can do? I mean, you talked about the players. We talked about looking internally. What are some of those examples that coaches can do to have themselves prepared?
So what I do, you're talking about like what do I do for myself?
Yeah, so you talk about having your belt, making sure you're fed, doing all that. So I mean that's all external,
right?
But we want to look internally. What can coaches do to make sure they're prepared and in good position for leadership during a game?
Well, first of all, before the season starts, I tell the parents to make sure all that other stuff happens.
Right.
And I address it and say, if it doesn't, this is what's going to happen. But as a coach, I am preparing myself before I leave the house. I go through a checklist. I make sure that I have everything that I need for that day, whether it's the lineup. I will do the lineup the day before. And I'll find out from the parents who's going to be there, who's not going to be there. Because the last thing I want to do is have to try to change the lineup. And that kind of gets me, that gives me a mental, that always gives me like if somebody doesn't show up and they said they were going to be there and now I got to change the lineup. It's kind of like making your bed in the morning.
Yeah.
If you make your bed in the morning, you've got a victory right off the bat. You're ahead of the ball game. Now, if I've got to change the lineup because of this or that, now I'm thinking about it. Now I'm doing this and now I'm doing that. I don't want to have to do that. I want to be prepared all the way, and I want everything to go smoothly as much as. So I put a lot on myself.
So let's talk about that. Let's quickly. I'll name off a few things, and you can tell me yes, no, and why not. Parents in the dugout.
No, because parents should not be in the dugout, even at 10 years old, because it becomes a distraction. The kids need to focus on the game, and as a coach, you need to tell the parents before the season starts that they are no way and no how. Once they step on that field, they're mine. Be quiet, sit in your chair, and enjoy them.
Coach interaction or parent interaction with each other, vice versa, during a game.
Not during a game whatsoever. The coaches have a lot of jobs to do. Obviously, they're keeping track of your children, but also they need to be focused on the game and what's going on.
So when you look at coach interaction with players, is it something where you feel as the head coach you can talk to all the players, or do you empower your assistant coaches to talk to those players?
Absolutely empower the assistants, because they're just as important as you, if not more. Because sometimes the kids will relate to them better. And if you don't understand that, you need to put your ego aside and figure that out. Because you as a coach, you got a lot of things to do. You got a lot of things to think about. If you truly understand this game of baseball and the thousands of different intricacies that are taking place on every single pitch, and that you're thinking about that, if you understand that, you need to realize that you need to have a lot of other guys that can communicate and help you out.
Talking to the umpires, whose responsibility is that?
That is definitely my responsibility, and if you go as the coach. And, had situations where I've had Chuck. I'm going to throw Chuck. I hope you're listening to this. I'm going to throw you under the bus, brother. I've heard, and I think he's only done it once or twice, but I've yelled at Chuck, said, "Hey, stop it," because we go back to the umpire situation. I want to be in control of that because I'm supposed to be. They have this thought, especially up at scene, and they're directed this at every baseball field in America now. The umpire or the coach or the umpire, what have you, they're only supposed to talk to the manager. And so if they start to hear somebody else chirping, all of a sudden they get this. it's emotions, and emotions affect everybody, including the umpire. And if he hears some assistant chirping, whether he might even think it's me.
Yeah.
He might not even have my voice down. He might even think it's me. So when I hear him chirping, I'm like, easy. Not because I may disagree. I may totally agree with what Chuck's saying. But we need to keep him, we need to keep that umpire cooler than Fonzie.
Chuck is your assistant coach.
He's one of my assistant coaches, yeah. We need to make sure that umpire is cooler than Fonzie because I want the other coach yelling at him. I hope and pray that the other manager is chirping in that guy's ear because you know what I'm going to do between innings?
Stir the pot.
I'm going to go up to that. I'm going to go up to him and I'm going to tap him on the shoulder and I'm going to say, "Hey, Mr. Umpire, I apologize for that guy. I know he's really getting on you, but I just want to tell you, you're doing a fantastic job out here. I know how tough your job is."
You realize you're giving away your secrets on a podcast.
I know. I know. I'm kicking myself right now. I have my daughter, I come from a long line of pot stirrers. It's just part of, my daughter's the same way. It's just part of the game. It's the game you play. And I heard a great coach once say that when it comes down to baseball, if you're not cheating, you're not trying.
What's the appropriate time for a parent to approach a coach or a coach to approach a parent in the season?
Anytime. You know
Outside
if
game.
you want to, yeah. I've had ideally, and we talked about Matheny saying parents don't question the coach, and that's all well and good, and don't do that in front of the kids. And I've had parents come to me after a game, or before a game, or call me at home, or text or whatever, and that's great. And I totally understand if you've got a question, you're not sure why Johnny's not getting the playing time. I totally understand that. I've been through that with my kids. I've been through that. I don't necessarily have that problem with my daughter, but I totally understand that. And we all want the best for our kids. When we talk about the rose-colored glasses, we love our kids unconditionally, and I understand that. Now, that being said, I've also been on the other side, and I think one of the reasons I am so understanding is because, I have my stepson, and my wife was a huge help. She was a scorekeeper for me for years, and she's Italian. And every time we drive home from Akron or Cleveland or Pittsburgh from a tournament, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? Why'd you do this? And my stepson, when we first went to travel, he was a second baseman. And when we first went to travel, he should have been playing 10U, but he was playing 11. He struggled. And so I took him off of second base and I put him in the outfield because it slowed the game down for him and he was able to understand. And my wife, it drove her nuts because she knew he was a good second baseman. But he was struggling with the pace of the game because it changed. But what I did ended up benefiting, and I had to, and this comes back to why, I had to explain to her why. And so when you talk to your parents, you have to make sure that you're explaining why.
You want to put a bow on the leadership thing before we get to the questions?
Absolutely. Just I think we covered it all. The extreme ownership, taking ownership, making sure that these kids understand, and this comes into belief, what the plan is, being able to put your ego aside, communicating, cover and move, keep things simple, decentralized command, allow these kids to put themselves in a situation where they're leading themselves, making sure that you have all your bases covered, and then don't forget discipline. I love John Wooden, love Bill Belichick. Wooden, one of the first things he did, he'd have a class with making sure these kids knew how to tie their shoes. Because if they didn't have their shoes tied right, they'd get blisters. And if they were blisters, they couldn't do them any good on the bench. John Wooden was an amazing coach.
I just think that there weren't many UCLA guys that knew how to tie their shoes. All right, first question as we wrap up the second episode of the Baseball Coaches Podcast comes from, hey, right here in East Palestine. Britt, I have a young son who is looking to go up in age bracket. Would you suggest him staying where he's at or moving up, I guess is what they're looking. So I'm guessing it's like the middle ground where they're too good maybe, or the top of their class in one age bracket, or moving up to another age bracket. What do you recommend?
That is a fantastic question, and that almost is a podcast in itself.
Yeah.
Because if your child is really, really good, and playing up will actually help them. Because if they're playing at their level and they're looking like a superstar, maybe they're not. And there's a dichotomy to that too, because they're playing sometimes with kids that are friends of theirs. It's all going to depend on the kid. I've had a kid that's been playing up with me for years, Clay Wiesen, and he could handle it. I have another kid who's going to be playing up for me this year. I've got a kid on my team that's a junior in high school, and then I've got a kid on my team who's an 8th grader. His name's Luca Bertolasio. And Luca has the fastest hands through the zone I have ever seen in my life. And he played fall ball this year against 18-year-olds, and he handled himself just fine. And he's getting along with the group of kids that he's with, and so he's going to be good. Now, a lot of it's going to depend on the maturity of the kid, and it's going to depend on his ability. And you just want to make sure that you've got a coach who understands the ability of the child, and the coach that you're going up to understands how this kid needs to develop. Because if he doesn't, then you might be getting besides questioning your child's ability, when they're playing up, you also want to make sure that you're looking into the coach as well.
Here's the second question from Poland.
Oh, wow.
It says, Britt, I have 2 teams in our league this year, and we are struggling between picking equaling the teams out or making an A team and a B team. What are your thoughts and why?
Ooh, that's a tough one. So basically, they have a lot of kids, and he's not sure if he just wants to make 1 team or 2 teams.
So no, they want to make 2 teams. But I guess the question, it sounds like, do you make an A team with all your good kids on one team and your other kids that maybe aren't average or below average on another? I mean,
or do you mix them?
Or do you mix them and make them equal across? So you might end up, if let's say you could play 16 games,
right?
You hope they both end up 8-8.
And I'm going to give you this, and this is my opinion.
Sure.
I think that's a really good question, first of all. But my opinion is I think you should make the A and the B, and this is why. Because the kids that are really good are going to feed off of each other, and they're going to play. They're actually going to get better because of that, and that's going to make them better players. I can understanding the reasoning for both, and there is logical reasoning for both.
Do you feel that the B team in that situation, you might lose them the next year because they're not winning, or they go 0-16 or 1-15?
Well, they have to understand, and at the same time, I think you're going to be helping them because they also are going to be in situations now where they're going to get more growth because they're going to get more playing time together because they are not in a situation where, well, Johnny's a really good shortstop and he's an A player, but he's on this B team and he's getting most of the shortstop reps versus Billy's not as good of a shortstop, but he's pretty good, but he's not as good as Johnny. But now Billy's going to get a chance to get the reps,
yep.
And he's going to get a chance to get better. Now, Billy, even though he's on the B team, is still going to be playing these same teams that Johnny is. So he's going to get the reps, and he's going to get better. And I've seen kids in that situation improve. And
so the experience is the biggest part of it.
Get the reps. The experience is huge. And then going back to that last question, if you put a kid and he's going up, and you put a kid on a 16U team, and let's see, he should play on a 14U, and he's not getting the reps up there, get him back to the 14U.
Yep.
Because the reps is what's important. And if you're putting a kid in a situation where he's not going to get any playing time, get him back to where he should be.
And our final question comes from Canfield, and it says, Britt, my son is looking to become a Major League Baseball player at the ripe age of 10 years old. He wants to specialize in baseball and does not want to play basketball or flag football. What are your thoughts?
Wow. Yeah. That's a good question, because at 10 years old, my advice to you as a parent would be to tell him that he is going to become a better athlete if he learns to play other sports as well, and it's going to make him a better baseball player. Now, if he wants to take a time, it's flag football season, and if he wants to take his time and go to Diamond 9 or something and go to a coach, or go to Matt over in Newcastle, go to Matt DeSalvo and work on some of his skills, go do that. But let's play some other sports.
Stay playing, because that's going to make you an overall better athlete, which is going to help you on the baseball field.
That
does it for the mailbag here for the Baseball Coaches Podcast. A great episode, too, I thought, Britt.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Me too. Thank you, DJ. You are the man.
What are we looking forward to in Episode 3?
In Episode 3, we haven't decided yet.
Okay.
But one of the things that we've gotten a lot of requests, and it's going to be coming down the road shortly, is we're going to be talking about recruiting and the whole college recruiting process. I know I'm actually excited about that as well, because I'm involved with my daughter in that whole process as well. But also I know a lot of kids at this age now are starting to look, and for parents it's something that it's like, what do I do?
Yep.
And I know a lot of people have questions. So that's coming. I don't know if it's going to be the next podcast, but that is in the near future. So
we're excited. We got some special guests lined up for that one.
And that's what I want to. I don't want to. I don't want to commit to that yet until I know I have those guests, because those guys are the experts, and those are the ones that I want to have on the show.
We're excited. That's going to do it for Episode 2 of the Baseball Coaches Podcast. For Britt Taylor, I'm DJ Oakley saying so long, everybody, and take us out to the ball game.